Okay, so here's our second video. It's about acid-base balance, which is dealing with the pH in your body. The pH in your body is something that has to be very tightly regulated with most other things, as you know from AMP1 and all your intro to biology courses. Homeostasis has a real range, like with your body temperature, you have a range that could be from like the low 97s to the high 98s, something like that. And that's a completely fine range of temperatures to be in. If you go a little higher or a little lower than that, you're not going to be in any sort of real physiological trouble. But that's not true with pH, because pH, just the smallest variations can cause really big problems with your enzyme function, because changes in pH can denature proteins, which enzymes are made of proteins, and that would break down your enzymes, cause them to cease functioning, can break down cell structures like the cell membrane. All sorts of problems can arise. So you have a very low range of pH. So the pH scale, let's see if I can fit this down here. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. It would be very alkaline or basic if you have a pH of 14, and a pH that's very low, around 0, would be very acidic. And that seems kind of backwards. A low pH is acidic and a high pH is alkaline, until you think about what the word pH really means. It's the power of hydrogen. So it's a logarithmic scale, which means that it's, if you play with the math, it comes out to the numbers that you would get down here of 0 to 14. But it's just really simply, as far as we need to worry about it, it's how much free hydrogen you have in a solution. And in this case, the solution would be, say, your blood or your interstitial fluid. This unbound hydrogen, this free hydrogen, it means it's not part of another molecule. So, for example, let's just use down here, we have just free hydrogens floating around there. So just a bunch of free hydrogens. That would be very acidic. But we could also bind them to, say, another molecule. We can bind them to this molecule, which is bicarbonate. So they can bind together. Then we have two hydrogens, so H2, CO3. This is something called carbonic acid. We're going to see this in a couple of minutes. But no more free hydrogens, right? So here we had a bunch of free hydrogens. Then we essentially bound them up or soaked them up with this bicarbonate here, forming this carbonic acid, no free hydrogen. So lots of free hydrogens would be very low pH, very acidic. No free hydrogens would be very high pH, very alkaline, very basic. So if we look here at these examples, we've got over here, all of the hydrogens are bound to a phosphate group. So H2PO4. PO4 is the phosphate. This would be the very alkaline situation. I'm pointing. The very alkaline situation. This would be a very high pH because we don't have any free hydrogens floating around there. Over here, so the other extreme, lots of free hydrogens. Let's just make none of them bound up. So there's just free hydrogens all the way around. So that would be the very acidic situation, a very low pH of 0 or 1. Usually you don't see a pH all the way to 0, more like 1. Would be a very, very low pH. So we don't want to be down here. We don't want to be too alkaline. We don't want to be too acidic. What we want is to be somewhere in the middle. 7, which is neutral. We want to be just a little bit above 7. So about 7.35 to 7.45 is where we want to be. So essentially, where we want to be is in the middle. We want some free hydrogen. So we got some free hydrogen, and we want some of the hydrogens bound up to the phosphate in this example. So some hydrogen's free, some are bound up. It's in a nice balance. Now this is a buffer system. So in this buffer system, we have a molecule, in this case phosphate, that can bind up these free hydrogens. We have a visitor here, a little kitty cat who's trying to be part of the lecture. So say hi, kitty cat. You can see your little ears coming around there. Anyway, I told you that you were going to get photobombed by kitty cats, and here's the first one. So with a buffer system, like let's just look at this one. We have two molecules here. We have hydrogen, or three molecules I should say. We have hydrogen, we have PO4, two minuses, and then we have where we can bind the hydrogen to the PO4. So that would make acidity. This would be the opposite there. This would be somewhere in the middle. Okay, so we want to have all of these situations happening at the same time. So what this molecule here can do is it can drop off a hydrogen, causing a free hydrogen if we need to lower the pH a little bit. So if we became too alkaline, if our pH was going up too high, this molecule can drop off or donate a hydrogen so that we have more free hydrogen and our pH starts to go down. Now if our pH went down too low, so we had too many free hydrogens, this molecule here can accept or bind a hydrogen, making the pH go back this way. And we can also, this molecule can take on another hydrogen. And we can even get to a H3PO4 situation. So it can really buffer a lot of hydrogens. If you just think of these buffer systems almost like a little sponge, you know, you put this kind of basic molecule here that can soak up free hydrogens. That's what a buffer system does. And this buffer system doesn't require any manipulation by the body. It doesn't require any stimulus to happen. It's, you know, if you just put hydrogen and phosphate in a beaker, you would have this buffer system happening where you would have all of these different molecules being represented in that beaker eventually to get you to about a neutral pH. Okay. So that's what these notes over here are saying what a buffer system can do, and in particular this is the phosphate buffer system that we just went over. So because we can have this HPO4, which is called monohydrogen phosphate, because there's one hydrogen on it, that can bind the hydrogen or accept a hydrogen if we're too acidic and we need to make the pH higher. It can bind that hydrogen, and that will give us this H2PO4, which you can probably guess that its name is going to be dihydrogen phosphate. And dihydrogen phosphate can actually accept another or bind another hydrogen to make this H3PO4, which would be trihydrogen phosphate. Now it can also go in the opposite direction, so the trihydrogen phosphate can donate a hydrogen to lower the pH. The dihydrogen phosphate can donate a hydrogen to lower the pH, so can the monohydrogen phosphate. So the equation ends up looking something like this. And I use these reversible arrows here to show plus hydrogen, to show that it can go both ways. I'm running out of room already. Totally running out of room. And it would continue on. This one is a pretty long one. To just PO4 minus, so just a plain old phosphate, 3 free hydrogens over here. So this equation just goes back and forth just in response to whatever external factors are coming in, causing you to have either a lower pH or a higher pH. Now over here where we have lots of free hydrogens, that would be the lower pH or the acidic side of the equation. And over here where we have all the hydrogens bound up, that would be the alkaline side of the equation. It's just written this way by convention, where we have the alkaline side of the equation over on the left and the acidic side over on the right. But if you wrote it backwards, it would be the same thing because it's a reversible reaction. So in a nutshell, buffers. They accept hydrogen when you need to increase the pH, make it more alkaline. They donate the hydrogen when you need to decrease the pH, make it more acidic. They don't need any sort of stimulus. They don't need the body to do anything. It's just a chemical reaction that's going to happen no matter what the body does. And it's reversible, so it can go backwards and forwards. So we have this buffer system, the phosphate buffer system, which happens mostly in the intracellular fluid in the cell. If you remember from the last lecture, we mentioned that phosphate was something that you had more of in the intracellular fluid than in the extracellular fluid. So that's there helping to buffer what's happening inside the cell, so the pH inside of each cell. So here's the whole equation written out. I didn't have to go writing it out all that way. I had it written out here anyway. So trihydrogen phosphate donates a hydrogen to make dihydrogen phosphate and a free hydrogen, and monohydrogen phosphate with 2 free hydrogens, and it's plain old phosphate with 3 free hydrogens. Over here is the acidic side. Over here is the alkaline side. And ideally you want all of these represented, so you're kind of somewhere in the middle of that. So all of our buffer systems are going to work very much the same, just donating, accepting hydrogen. So another one that we can talk about is the protein buffer system. Or if you think of the chemical structure of proteins, and amino acids are going to end with the COH group. There's a hydrogen. That hydrogen can come off of that molecule. So we can have the CO minus plus a free hydrogen. And then it can go the other way. The CO minus can bind that free hydrogen and go backwards that way. So this would be the acidic side, this would be the alkaline side, and you want to be somewhere where you have all of these represented. Now the one that we're going to really focus on is the bicarbonate buffer system. This is happening in your blood. It happens in your renal tubules in the kidneys. It happens in a lot of places. And it's very, very important. We're going to focus primarily on it on the blood right now, but when we get to the kidneys for exam 3, we'll see this coming back into play again. So you want to remember this buffer system because we're going to see it kind of repeatedly throughout the semester. So here's the equation for it. Water plus carbon dioxide can come together, be added together to each other to form H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. Then that can dissociate, which means breaking apart. When a molecule breaks apart, you call it dissociation. And that will dissociate into bicarbonate, which we see, and a free hydrogen. So this would be acidic over here. This would be alkaline over here with no free hydrogens. So we want to be somewhere in the middle. And depending on what's happening in your body, so if you're kind of drifting towards being acidic, then your bicarbonates are going to try to bind more hydrogens to push you back this way to have more carbonic acid rather than this situation with all these free hydrogens. Because you don't want that. You want to raise the pH some by going that way. If you were to become too alkaline, this buffer system is going to react by having carbonic acid dissociate, start sending out free hydrogen. So you start pushing the equation this way to lower the pH to get it back to neutral if it went too high. So it's always going to be reacting to whatever is going on in the body. Now, this buffer system does need an enzyme in order to work, and that enzyme is called carbonic anhydrase. You find this in your red blood cells, and you find it in the renal tubule cells, and you find it in various places, but we're really focusing right now on it being in the red blood cells, and this becomes important later in life or in this class. When you think about, say, just blood plasma, which is the fluid part of blood, the water part of blood, and you've got your red blood cells in there. And you've got all your cells surrounding, in the tissues surrounding the blood, and they're making carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide is getting into the blood. And you want that to happen so that you can, bring this blood to the lungs, exhale the carbon dioxide. You don't just want carbon dioxide building up in the tissues and in the blood plasma. Now, what you don't want to have happen is so much carbon dioxide building up here that you can't diffuse carbon dioxide out of the interstitial fluid anymore. So you need to kind of tie up this carbon dioxide into this bicarbonate buffer system, and you want to get it out of the plasma and into the red blood cells so that you can keep on having carbon dioxide come out of the interstitial fluid and going into the blood. So that's why this is important, that this is happening in the red blood cells, because it allows you to keep diffusing carbon dioxide from the tissues into the blood. So what's going to happen is the carbon dioxide comes out of the tissues into the blood plasma, and then it goes into the red blood cells where we find the carbonic anhydrase. Now, water is, of course, readily available wherever you happen to be in your body. It's all over the place, so this reaction can then run. It has the carbonic anhydrase, you have the water, you have the carbon dioxide, so then you're going to form the carbonic acid, and then finally the bicarbonate and the free hydrogen, all right here in the blood. This is going to determine the pH of your blood. So essentially, you're carrying the carbon dioxide in your blood, in the red blood cells, all tied up in this bicarbonate buffer system, and that's good. And this is one of the most important buffer systems that you have. Now, also, because this involves carbon dioxide, if you think about carbon dioxide and water as ingredients to make carbonic acid, and carbonic acid is the thing that is going to eventually give you bicarbonate. You can, and free hydrogen, you can think of this as the more of these you have, so water, always going to have plenty of water, but the more carbon dioxide you have, the more carbonic acid you're going to make, and the more it's going to dissociate into these. So if you have a lot of carbon dioxide, you start driving the reaction to the right. You end up with free hydrogens, and there you are. You're acidic. That's not very good. Now, if you don't have enough carbon dioxide, so let's say your cells aren't making carbon dioxide, so they're not doing cellular respiration for whatever reason, or you're just exhaling too much carbon dioxide for any reason you can think of that you would not have enough carbon dioxide, well, you're not going to be able to make a lot of this. So you're not going to be making a lot of this, so the equation is going to be drawn in the other direction. It's going to fall backwards, making you more alkaline as bicarbonate binds the hydrogen. So that would be sort of like a problem with this buffer system. But what it's there to do is, if you are to become more acidic, so you're too far over here, you have too much free hydrogen, bicarbonate soaks up that hydrogen and forms carbonic acid, and it drives that equation over to the left to raise the pH. If you become too alkaline, you don't have enough free hydrogen, then this equation is going to start pushing over towards the right, making you lowering that pH so that you can be closer to neutral. And if you just think about, think of this bicarbonate. If you have a sick stomach, like your belly doesn't feel good, it feels kind of acidic, like heartburn or something, and you take an antacid, those antacids have bicarbonate in them. So your problem in your stomach when it's all queasy and you have heartburn and all that is you have too many hydrogens in there. So you throw in the bicarbonate soaks up the hydrogen, now you have carbonic acid and your stomach doesn't feel bad anymore. Okay, so on this page we have the buffer system written out again. Remember, over here is the acidic side, over here is the alkaline side. And this is what we just talked about. So if you add carbon dioxide to the system, so you have too much of this, you essentially have a lot of ingredients to make carbonic acid and then to eventually form these things as you push over to the right towards the acidic side. Where if you had less of the carbon dioxide, it would push over to the left, making you more on the alkaline side. So you want to stay somewhere in the middle. So let's focus on what would happen if you added too much carbon dioxide to the system, or how you might end up adding too much carbon dioxide to the system and pushing it over to the right to make you more acidic. The reasons for that: hypoventilation. Ventilation refers to how much air is moving out of your lungs, and hypo is low or not enough. So this is where you're not exhaling enough. So the carbon dioxide isn't being able to be pulled out of the blood into the lungs and then exhaled into the world around you. So you're just building up that carbon dioxide in your body, causing you to push the equation to the right and you become more acidic. Lung diseases where you can't diffuse the carbon dioxide from the blood into the lungs in order to be exhaled in the first place. So any sort of lung disease that affects the connective tissue or the respiratory membrane in your lungs, pneumonia, things like that. Coronavirus, when it gets very severe, is a lot of fluid in the lungs. That causes problems with getting carbon dioxide out of there. Now, other reasons, non-breathing reasons, ketoacidosis. This is when you are starving, you haven't eaten for a long time, and you are breaking down especially proteins, but also fats. Fats give off keto acids too when you break them down, although we do use fat often as a fuel source in our cells. But if you end up having to use proteins as well, and you're relying strictly on fats and proteins as your energy source, you can end up with ketoacidosis from all those keto bodies or ketones. Let's do this one. Lactic acidosis. This is from when your skeletal muscles are exercising very, very hard and they run out of oxygen. So they are using more oxygen than what the supply is. So you kind of get a muscle cramp in that point, like a stitch sort of feeling. Or they start to burn. We all know that feeling. You're working out a little bit too hard and it kind of hurts. So that's lactic acidosis happening. It's when you can't run the Krebs cycle because you don't have enough oxygen, so pyruvic acid just sort of ferments, it turns into lactic acid, and that's reversible. So as long as you don't just keep on doing it, which I can't imagine someone doing, although it's possible to cause this to be problematic throughout your whole body, but it's not very common. So that would be due to extreme exercise or heavy exercise. And then renal dysfunction. So any sort of situation with your kidneys where you're having any kind of difficulty with excreting hydrogen. So normally your kidneys are going to excrete hydrogen, and for bicarbonate, they want to reabsorb the bicarbonate. So these are the two mechanisms that we have for our kidneys involving this buffer system. We can get rid of too much hydrogen in the kidneys. We can just urinate it away if we are acidic. If we are acidic, we can also reabsorb more bicarbonate so that that bicarbonate can soak up the hydrogen. Now, if we're alkaline, we don't want to excrete our hydrogen. We want to keep it, so we don't want to urinate away the hydrogen, so we would excrete less. And we don't really want to reabsorb bicarbonate if we're alkaline. We want to do the opposite. We just want to let it go. So anything that causes a malfunction of that, so that normal balance of excreting the right amount of hydrogen and reabsorbing the right amount of bicarbonate, is going to end up being problematic. So let's look at a quick example of the renal tubule. And this is something that goes a little bit in depth, and it's something that you're going to want to remember, because when we do the kidney section for exam 3, we're going to do this sort of thing again. So let me just explain this picture here to you. What we have is the renal tubule right here. This is where we have filtrate, and this is eventually going to become urine. So this is what's going to be excreted. So anything that ends up in here is going to leave the body as urine. It's going to be gone. So this is when you want to get rid of stuff, you put it in the filtrate. Here are the cells of the renal tubule. So they are surrounding the renal tubule. And they're in between, they're sitting there in between the filtrate and the capillaries that surround the renal tubule, so the blood. So anything that goes into the blood is being reabsorbed back into the body. Anything that goes into the filtrate is being excreted away from the body. So if you're putting it in the blood, you're keeping it. If you're putting it in the filtrate, you're losing it. So I have 3 situations going on here, 3 things that could become a problem in the kidneys if someone were to have some kind of kidney malfunction. So this one over here, when we have 2 ions moving in opposite directions like we do here, so here we have sodium going into the cell from the filtrate, and we have hydrogen going out of the cell into the filtrate. So sodium going in, hydrogen going out. Those movements of those 2 ions are tied together in this one particular carrier. So this is called a countertransport mechanism because they're going counter opposite to each other. So we have sodium-hydrogen countertransport. The hydrogen is coming from the blood and coming from just what's going on in the cells too, with the whole buffer system going on in the cells in the renal tubular, because it does happen in there. So we're excreting the hydrogen and we're taking a sodium and we're putting it into the cell. So sodium always wants into the cell anyway, so that's, just easy to do. And it drives the, or provides the energy for the hydrogen to also use this carrier to go out of the cell. So we're excreting hydrogen here. So imagine you're acidic and you have too much hydrogen in the blood, and you can just sort of step up this, do this faster. You're excreting more hydrogen and you're going to end up reabsorbing more sodium. Now, when you reabsorb sodium, water follows. Remember, water is very attracted to sodium. Sodium is an electrolyte, and that's something that water likes to follow. So water comes back out of the filtrate into the cell and eventually into the blood. So when you reabsorb sodium, you also reabsorb water, and that causes your blood pressure to go up. So this carrier is utilized by a hormone called aldosterone that is there to help your blood pressure go up. So if your blood pressure is dropping down too low, you release aldosterone. There's others. We'll wait till the endocrine system to get into those. But aldosterone is going to stimulate this to happen so that you reabsorb more sodium. A byproduct of this, of course, is that you end up excreting hydrogen, and that's typically good. It helps to keep you in balance. But if you have problems, like not enough aldosterone, let's say, so you don't make enough aldosterone, this isn't going to work. So your blood pressure, you're going to have trouble with that. So you're not going to be able to pull your blood pressure up very well. But you're also not excreting enough hydrogen. So if you look over here at this equation and you're not excreting enough hydrogen, what happens? You become acidic. You have too much hydrogen in your blood. Okay, we're almost through this long lecture. I promise most of them aren't going to be this long. So this next carrier, this one in pink, another countertransport mechanism. It's where you're trading potassium and hydrogen. So hydrogen is being excreted while potassium is being put back into the cell. So just another way of getting rid of your hydrogen here. And then this carrier is linked to the sodium-potassium pump. So I just put that there just for illustration. We're not really caring about that much. But when you reabsorb the potassium into the cell, that is how it would get back into the blood, is for the sodium-potassium pump. We're not terribly worried about that too much. We're worried more about here because we're thinking about acid-base balance right now. So the potassium goes into the cell, the hydrogen goes out. When all this is working perfectly, this is nice and in balance. But if this doesn't work, if this carrier is not working at all, then, well, you're not reabsorbing your potassium and you're not excreting your hydrogen. So again, you get hydrogen stuck in the blood rather than being able to go out into the urine. So you become too acidic. Now, you also become hypokalemic because you're not reabsorbing your potassium. So we know from the last lecture that when you're hypokalemic, your cells become underexcitable. So you're all acidic and you're underexcitable, and none of that is very good. So this is just happens with a malfunction of this carrier. Now the last carrier is dealing just with the interface between the cell and the blood. So it's not dealing so much with the filtrate, it's dealing just with the cell and the blood. And that's this one, another countertransport mechanism called the chloride shift. And essentially, you're shifting chlorine to treat it with a bicarbonate. So you're reabsorbing bicarbonate, putting bicarbonate into the blood, and you're putting chlorine into the cell. We're not really worried about chlorine levels because if this messes up, if you have too much chlorine in your blood or too little chlorine in your blood, it doesn't really have a lot of effect on you. So not really much of a problem. But if this chloride shift isn't working, the problem is that you're not reabsorbing the bicarbonate. If you're not reabsorbing the bicarbonate, you don't have enough of this to soak up this, which means that you're going to be too acidic. Okay? So you can see in that green, it's kind of squished down there. When you reabsorb the bicarbonate, that makes your pH higher, keeping you from being too acidic. And if you cannot do it, then you're going to become too acidic because you're not reabsorbing that bicarbonate. And at the same time, you would also, if this isn't working, you would also be hyperchloremic. Oops, I think I put hypo, so hyperchloremic, because the chlorine is going to be stuck in the blood, not able to get out. And again, like I said, that's not really much of a problem being hyperchloremic. You're not going to have really much of a problem because of that. The problem is because of the bicarbonate. So the things that go along with kidney malfunction and you being too acidic would be having hypoaldosteronism, when your sodium or your potassium hydrogen countertransport doesn't work, so you become hypokalemic and acidic at the same time. And then for chlorine, for this bicarbonate chloride shift here, if this isn't working, you become acidic and you become hyperchloremic. So those are the ways that those can malfunction in order to make you acidic. If they malfunction in the opposite direction, so if they all worked overboard, then you would become too alkaline. So it would just be the exact opposite. You would become too alkaline. In this case, also your blood pressure would go up a lot because you're reabsorbing a lot of sodium and water. For this one, you would become too alkaline because you're losing too much hydrogen, but you would also become hyperkalemic, so too much calcium in your blood, so you'd be like all jittery. It would be terrible. And then for this one, well, you'd be alkaline, but you'd also be hypochloremic. So, and that's not going to do much problems. It would be being too alkaline that would be the problem for that. Okay, so now, how do you fix that? This is our last thing that we need to talk about because we gave ourselves all kinds of problems with our acid-base balance, so we need to fix it. So if you are acidic, there is something called, or if you're acidic or alkaline, we're going to be able to fix it through our breathing in respiratory compensation, or we can fix it through our kidneys in renal compensation. So for respiratory compensation, if we are acidic, we would want to hyperventilate. That means exhaling a lot of carbon dioxide. And just remember the equation. Just write that here really quickly. Plus hydrogen. So if we get rid of the carbon dioxide, we drive the equation to the left. If we're too acidic, we're over here. We want to drive that equation back over that way so that we become a little bit more alkaline. We raise the pH. So hyperventilation, breathing out excessively. So lots and lots of hyperventilation, lots and lots of exhaling. Our kidneys, remember again, our problem, we're acidic. We have too much hydrogen floating around free. So we want to excrete more hydrogen, and we want to reabsorb more bicarbonate. Bicarbonate to soak up the hydrogen and just to get rid of the hydrogen on its own. So if you think of, you're acidic, you want to do this carrier, you want to do this carrier, you want to do that carrier. Okay? Now, also think about if you see somebody hyperventilating, or if you were hyperventilating yourself, you may be doing respiratory compensation. So this is something that happens a lot, well, not a lot, but it happens to people who are, say, diabetic, and they end up with ketoacidosis sometimes because they can't get sugar into their cells very well, so they end up using proteins and lipids exclusively for energy, and that can cause ketoacidosis. So a person who's suffering from, say, ketoacidosis from diabetes, say, could be doing hyperventilation as respiratory compensation. So when people say, like, oh, if somebody is hyperventilating, then you put a paper bag over their mouth and make them breathe into the paper bag, don't do that, because think about what could happen if that person is hyperventilating because they're acidic and they're doing respiratory compensation. They don't know that. You don't go, oh boy, my blood feels really acidic right now, I think I'm going to hyperventilate. Your body's just doing that on its own. So, they're just sitting there hyperventilating. They don't know they're ketoacidic. And if you stick a paper bag over their face, then they're just breathing in their carbon dioxide again. That's going to drive the equation that way, make them more acidic. So the take home from that, never stick a paper bag over the face of somebody who is hyperventilating. Now, the opposite problem, alkalosis. How to correct that? If you become alkaline, you'll have respiratory compensation. You just do the opposite. You want to hypoventilate. If you were to sit here and say start hyperventilating just to try this out, which don't try that out, but if someone were to just sit there and just hyperventilate, you could cause yourself to become more alkaline and even end up in alkalosis. So the fix for that would be hypoventilation, so less exhaling, letting the carbon dioxide build up to push the equation over towards the right. In the meantime, your kidneys, remember, you're alkaline, so you don't have enough free hydrogen, so you want to stop excreting. You don't want to excrete the hydrogen, and you don't want to reabsorb the bicarbonate. So you don't want to do this. Nope, you're alkaline, don't want that bicarbonate back. You don't want to do that. You don't want to lose your hydrogen, and you don't want to lose that, because also you don't want to lose hydrogen there. So less of all of those things. Now, what could make you alkaline? One, hyperventilating, so just for no reason unless you're hyperventilating to fix acidosis. And then metabolic causes excessive vomiting. So not just like you throw up a couple times, but those kind of, the really bad flu where you're just throwing up all day long. That can cause you to have a bit of a alkaline problem. So on that happy note, this is the end of this video. Promise this will be probably one of the longer videos that I'll give you all semester. They'll be shorter, I promise. So the next one will be about the endocrine system, and I'll see you then.